talking about leading change and then talking about a specific type of change, right? Leading in a crisis. And so I want to start out by doing something that I am half excited about, half worried about. Okay, so we're going to talk about an organizational crisis that you guys have experienced. And so it's personal, and that's why it might be a little touchy. But I want you to put yourself in the situation of this person. So this was our incoming provost and vice president of academic affairs.
Provost.
So provost is somebody who's really over students. So it's somebody who is like a conduit for between students and the president of the university. So it's somebody who really represents students. And then that's also why she's the vice president of academic affairs. And that person usually holds dual roles. Okay? So this woman is coming in. She's hired this summer, and then like 2 months after she's hired and 2 months before she starts, there's a shooting on campus. Jason Washington was shot, and we're not going to get into the details of it, but she comes in knowing that students are angry, the community is angry, and there's a possibility that regardless of this specific situation, that this could happen again. And so she's managing an organizational crisis that's not of her own making. She wasn't even here when it happened. She certainly wasn't involved in any of the decisions that took place beforehand. And now she has to manage and lead in that crisis situation. And so we're going to take this situation, which involved a shooting on campus, controversy over what happened and who was to blame, students angry about security officers being armed and the questions about whether that should exist, the community and the students looking to this person and to her boss, the president, about what to do and how we're going to handle this. And as the vice president of academic affairs, as the provost, she's not only liable to the students now, she's also in charge of making sure that students want to come to Portland State in the future, right? So she wants to maintain a reputation within Portland, within the broader community. And so she wants to handle this crisis appropriately, taking into account all parties and how they might be feeling, right? And so she's dealing with this situation, and I want you to put yourself in this situation, and I want you to brainstorm how you would handle this. Okay. And again, I want you to be thinking about leading in this crisis, not just about this particular situation, but also about the possibility of something similar happening again on campus, right? And we don't know. We don't have a clue what those circumstances are going to be, right? So I want you to identify the crisis or the problem for different constituencies. So how are current students feeling? They may be feeling that there are different crises, right? What about future students? What about Portland? What about those in charge of the university, right? What about her boss, the president? So think about what the different crises are, what the different problems are in this situation. And I want you to outline those first. And then for each one, I want you to outline a potential action taken. And you can have multiple actions that you want to take to address each of the problems. And finally, we'll skip number 3 for right now. And I want you to also come up with a preventative action. So what can you do to prevent this problem in the future? Okay, next I want to talk a little bit about why people resist change. So a lot of what you're doing when you manage a crisis is trying to solve that crisis by driving change in your organization, right? So we've talked about in the past different types of change, right? One is the type of change where you see an opportunity out in the environment and you proactively try to lead change. This is the other type. This is a type where there's a crisis in the environment, right? Some crisis comes and it's clear to everybody that there's a sense of urgency in trying to drive change. But even in that type of change, where people do already kind of understand the sense of urgency in driving change, they are already looking to a leader for direction, right? That's one of the times in which it's appropriate to use your formal authority to drive change, right? So these things are already happening, and yet there are still people who are going to resist the change. And so there's a number of reasons why people accept the change and why people resist the change. So I want you to look through these reasons and see if you are taking into account how to help these different parties accept the change, right? Support the change, and whether or not your solutions are taking into account the reasons why those various parties might resist the change. I will say that the provost that I put up, who was in this situation, resigned about a month ago. So leading change is really hard, right? And sometimes you fail. And so that, that just goes to show that not everybody who tries to lead in a crisis is successful. And sometimes there's a need to try to bring somebody in again, right? To try to handle it better. So here's some ways that you can try to gain support from people who are going to resist the change, right? And you may have come up with lots of different problems and solutions that address some of the problems, may fail to address others, right? You may find that a solution to this problem is actually going to make sure that I can't use this other solution. So, because there are different constituencies with different points of view. So here's some ways to try to gain support from resistors. First, and we've talked a little bit about this, you can try to help them openly express their thoughts and feelings. Not just about what potential solutions there are, but once you come up with a change program, what it is that you're going to change and how you're going to change it, continue to get feedback from them, see if there are, explain why you made the decision, even though it may be counter to their ideas. If they can better understand what the decision was and why, that can really help them. But in addition then, after you've done that, try to ask a bit more and gain some more feedback on how they feel about the change. And if there are small things that you can do to adjust it, to take into account how they're feeling about your proposed plan for change, right? Listen carefully to their concerns, explore their fears, take them seriously. So that's something we talked about in last class, about the importance of your employees. The example from last class, the situation was that employees have a new technology and it works well for some products and not for others, right? And so we talked about how important it is to really take seriously their concerns and their fears and try to take those into account when driving change, right? You want to encourage them in the planning and implementing process and making sure that they are part of the solution, right? So the solution shouldn't just be things that you're doing, but it should also involve the students in this case, right? And the community, potentially. Identify those with something to lose and anticipate how they might respond, right? So taking into account some of the reasons that people resist change and thinking through how they might respond to your proposed change based on their reasons for resisting and what they expect to lose from your change. And then helping everyone find a role somewhere within their department or within your student organizations, right? But helping you understand what your role is in the change and how your actions can actually make a difference and matter for the proposed change. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the actual implementation plan. So we've done a little bit of thinking about what clearly is the problem at hand. The problem, not just one broad sweeping problem, but the problem for different parties, different people with different perspectives, right? And now we've also talked a little bit about what some ideas might be for crafting a solution, potential solutions. We've also talked a little bit about bringing other people in, the balance of making decisions on our own as a leader, but also bringing people in to some of that decision-making process. And once you've actually come up with a solution, now let's talk a little bit about crafting the implementation plan. How are you actually going to implement these changes, right? Which are not firm and concrete, even on your pieces of paper, but as a general thing. Hopefully this will help make it a little bit more real to you thinking about crafting an implementation plan. Okay, so you need to make sure that a good implementation plan has these characteristics, right? It should be simple, so it's overly complex, it can really just confuse people. If you've ever led a class even, right, I feel like sometimes I write out instructions and then get questions and it's like, oh gosh, the way I explained it was was a little bit like too much information or a little complex, right? I really need to lay it out maybe in bullet points or in 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, so that it's really clear to people how to do these sorts of things. So even in something very simple, like explaining an assignment, this can be difficult. So when you're crafting an implementation plan, your goals and what you're doing, your plan should be very simple, very concise, kind of an executive summary type thing, that even somebody who's not really fully paying attention and just skimming it is really kind of getting the broad strokes of your plan, right? It should also be created by people at all affected levels, right? That's why we talked a little bit about all the different parties, all the different perspectives, right? Because it should take into account these different perspectives, the reasons that they might resist the change, the reasons why they might support the change, how you expect them to react to your plan, right? So it should be crafted by at least thoughts of, if not bringing actually people from all different levels in to help come up with a solution, to vet it, those sorts of things. It should be structured in achievable chunks, right? So this is why we've talked a little bit about short-term goals. So your broader goal should be a challenging SMART goal. Some of your short-term goals some of them will be easy to achieve so that you're actually showing and making progress that you can demonstrate to your constituents, right, to the people involved. But you want it to be structured in achievable, small goals that ultimately lead up to the proposed change. You want to specify roles and responsibilities, right? You want people to know where they fit into the change, what they are accountable for in the change. And you also want to be flexible, right? You need to come up with a plan that's flexible, that can accommodate changes, that can accommodate people's feedback once you've actually set out the proposed change, right? So these are important things. So here are some tips for avoiding common change mistakes. First of all, don't move forward with a change program unless you have strong leadership at all levels, right? So once you come up with your plan, you want to have leaders in these different constituencies. You might want to have the president of the student body, right? You want to have leaders throughout the university, leaders in faculty, leaders in staff, leaders throughout the student body who are on board with the change and are helping to drive it, right? So throughout and also in the greater Portland area, right? You want to have people understanding, bought into the change that you're implementing, and who are going to be change leaders, right? You also don't want to underestimate the power of a vision, right? So Aaron talked a little bit about, you know, helping students and others get to know the people trying to drive these changes. And by knowing those people, by respecting them, by listening to them about the different possible solutions, the different parties involved, they can really help set a vision that tears at your heart, right? And helps you be bought into the proposed solution. Okay? Don't under-communicate the purpose of change and the actions planned. So this is one of the biggest problems in change. Most changes fail because employees don't understand the change. They feel this great amount of uncertainty. If you think about, we talked a little bit about a merger, right? In that kind of situation where two organizations, one's been bought and they're being combined, right? Employees just feel this outrageous sense of uncertainty. Am I going to be able to keep my job? What's my role going to be? What's my pay going to change, right? Who's my boss going to be? Might I get a promotion? Might I get a demotion, right? There's just so much. What is our company even, what's going to be the purpose of our company, right? Because we're taking two companies with two different missions and visions and combining them. You know, what is this even going to look like? So uncertainty is rampant, right? Everybody feels uncertainty and everybody has different concerns, right? And so the more you can communicate with people, right? The more information you can give them in this situation about your plan and about how you've taken into account these different perspectives, about what your plan addresses and about why you didn't select other plans, right? These sorts of things. The more communication you can give them, people, the more information you can give them, the better, right? That's really important. Don't ignore the importance of generating short-term wins, because that can show people that you're actually making progress and not just sitting on your hands and talking, right? Don't simply impose solutions that have been suggested by someone else. It doesn't mean that you'll never impose a solution that's suggested by someone else. If the mayor has the best solution, it doesn't mean you shouldn't take that solution and implement it. It's just that you shouldn't just simply accept it. Say, oh well, or my boss The president of the university says we should do this, done, we're doing it, right? Don't simply impose solutions that are suggested by someone else, and don't attempt to change everything at once. So this is a little bit more about managing a change, right, rather than a crisis-driven change specifically. But I really like this. I like this notion about when you try to drive change, how you might you might be open to like a small change that really mimics exactly what you've done before, but not to reimagining what your change might be. So let's watch this and see what we think.
15 years ago, I was the managing editor of a daily newspaper. Now, it was my college newspaper, the Dartmouth, covering all the hot happenings in Hanover, New Hampshire. And if you've never been to Hanover, New Hampshire, there are no hot happenings in Hanover, New Hampshire. It's a town of about 9,000 people. But still, we put out our paper 5 days a week. It was a mini tab, 8 to 16 pages. We were there in the very early days of the internet. We as a leadership team had to decide, what do we do in the face of this potentially seismic shift to our business? So what did we do? First, we hesitated. We were the last Ivy League newspaper to go on the internet. Why did we hesitate? Basic fear. We had a nice little business model at our newspaper, $250,000 in revenue, 2/3 of which came from charging subscriptions. When we saw the internet, we asked ourselves, how is it possible that this business model will work in the new technology? Even today, people haven't figured out how to charge for content online. So we paused and waited. But we got over that eventually and did create an online version of the paper. What did we do when we went online? Did we say, what a chance we've been given, what an opportunity to reinvent, to break out of the shackles that have confined us to Hanover, New Hampshire, to do something different? No, we said none of these things. Instead, we created a word-for-word, pixel-for-pixel replication of the newspaper on the internet, asking not what we can do differently, but how we can find people who would come to the internet and then subscribe to the print version of the newspaper. Instead of reimagining, we force-fit the new technology into the old business model. 15 years later, I now understand from my research and fieldwork that these are the 2 reasons why transformation is so punishingly difficult. You don't allocate resources towards the change, and when you do allocate resources, you don't reimagine the business. If you're a leader and you're facing this kind of transformative change, you've got to recognize these problems and work hard to make sure your organization doesn't fall into these traps. Recognizing in any opportunity if you organize and act in the right way.
So in this situation that we've been talking about, right, it is important to think about this threat, this crisis, as an opportunity to do things differently, to show that Portland State has handled the situation properly, to show the community, future students, and the students here that they're respected and that they're going to be safe, and that they should be proud to be a Viking, right? And so there's an opportunity, but it's hard, even in this very minor situation, right, where you're putting your newspaper on the website. It's hard to re-envision how you can handle such a change and make the university, or in their case the newspaper, better, right? And so some easier decisions would be very, very small tweaks to current policy, to current practices that maybe, quiet down some concerns and quell some voices, right? Or you can just wait long enough and people stop shouting, right? But there's also an opportunity in any crisis, especially, but in any change process as well, to really take the threat and make the most of it, right? Make a big change, reimagine, reinvent how you do things, and make a big change that's going to actually leave your organization better off at the end. So that's my final speech.